news for you, you can't wake up and be Mad Dog Russo. You can't wake up and be Adam Shine. You can't wake up and be Stephen A. It takes work. In the end, we all have people to answer to.
Stephen A. Smith has officially lost his patience, going off on Molly Qerim after she shocked ESPN by sealing a massive new deal with NBC Sports. What was supposed to be her biggest win yet has turned into a public fallout full of pride, power, and paychecks. Now the entire sports media world is watching this feud unfold like a primetime boxing match. How did it get to this point? Let's break it down. Because Molly's sudden exit didn't just make headlines, it cracked ESPN's foundation. For years, Stephen A. stood by Molly, calling her his rock, his on-air partner who kept First Take balanced while he delivered his trademark fire. But now, that partnership is in ashes. The same man who once defended her is now throwing shots, and it's all because NBC offered her something ESPN wouldn't: respect, money, and freedom. What should have been Molly's crowning moment turned into one of the juiciest, most dramatic media feuds we've seen in years. And tonight, we're breaking down how a decade-long alliance turned sour, why Stephen A. is so furious, and what insiders are whispering about behind those ESPN doors. This isn't just about contracts, it's about control. It's about who gets to run the game in sports media. And once you hear the things Stephen A. said off camera, the whispers about Molly's real reason for leaving and how NBC swooped in like a thief in the night to snatch her away, you'll realize this story runs way deeper than money. But let's start where it all exploded. Molly's abrupt departure from First Take. Nobody saw it coming. She was live on Monday morning, smiling, moderating debates, doing her thing. By Tuesday, gone. No farewell, no teary goodbye, not even a final clip montage. Just one cold Instagram story that said everything without saying a word. Fans were stunned. Stephen A. looked shaken on air, trying to hold it together. But according to insiders, behind the scenes he was livid, furious that the show he carried for years just lost his heartbeat, and even angrier that ESPN's higher-ups couldn't do a thing to stop it. Now officially, ESPN claimed it was just business. The Sports Business Journal said Molly simply declined an extension to explore other opportunities. ESPN's president of content, Burke Magnus, downplayed it, saying the one thing that was unexpected was the timing of all this.
Molly is somebody that I have leaned on many occasions in the past, as she has done when it comes to me. We've been partners on the show for the last 10 years. And a lot of times some of these things happen and it's just uncomfortable to see.
But come on, timing, that's the excuse. That doesn't explain the overnight vanishing act. It doesn't explain Stephen A.'s strange reaction when asked if he tried to make her stay. Suddenly, the man who boasts about protecting his colleagues got defensive. Why? Because he knew something bigger was at play. And then, weeks later, NBC enters the chat with a multi-million-dollar offer. You can't tell me that's coincidence. Molly wasn't just leaving a job show, she was breaking free from a system that's been unequal for years. Let's talk numbers. Stephen A. pockets around $20 million a year, while the people next to him barely scrape a fraction of that. One commentator even said, when you pay Stephen A. Smith $20 million, whoever his co-host is going to want an exorbitant amount of money. That right there, that's where the resentment started. Molly watched as ESPN re-signed Malika Andrews, gave Mina Kimes a $2 million deal, and rolled out the red carpet for Shannon Sharpe. Meanwhile, she had been holding down First Take for a decade, navigating every heated argument, every ego, every headline, and still, when it came time to negotiate her worth, she got lowballed. 10 years of loyalty and no real reward, no send-off, no appreciation post, just a quiet, cold goodbye. And to make it worse, ESPN tried to paint her exit as mutual. Magnus told The Athletic that Molly wanted to explore other things and that her interests weren't aligned with the networks. But here's where it gets real messy. Because if it was all so respectful, why did Stephen A. suddenly jump on his SiriusXM show talking about people forgetting they answer to somebody? Let's not pretend we don't know who he was talking about. He said he wasn't naming names, but come on, who else fits that description? Who else just walked away from ESPN after rejecting a deal? Who else stood up to the biggest name in sports commentary and dared to demand her worth? That wasn't a random jab. That was a warning shot straight at Molly. You could feel the tension even through the airwaves. He might not have said her name, but the energy was undeniable. He felt betrayed, blindsided, maybe even exposed. Because for years, First Take was Stephen A.'s empire and Molly was the co-pilot. But the second she decided to chart her own path, suddenly she became the problem. Suddenly it was about loyalty and respect. It's the same old story. When a woman in the industry demands her value, the system calls it ego. NBC knew exactly what they were doing. They gave her the kind of platform that ESPN never truly offered. Sources say NBC outbid ESPN by a wide margin, and word is Molly's role will be more than just moderating. She'll have creative control, producing credits, and a seat at the decision-making table. That's a power move, and Stephen A. knows it, because for the first time in years, he's not the one in charge. This isn't just a rivalry, it's a statement. Molly didn't just walk away from ESPN, she walked into a new era for women in sports broadcasting. But make no mistake, the drama is far from over. Because if you think Stephen A. is the type to let something like this slide, you don't know Stephen A. Smith. The tension is building, the shots are getting louder, and the game, it's only just beginning. And the craziest part, the more Stephen A. denies it, the guiltier he looks. Every time he insists it's not about her, while throwing out another rant about loyalty and humility, it becomes clearer this wasn't business, it was personal. You could feel the sting in every word, like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. Now here's where things get spicy. Multiple insiders claim that long before her ESPN deal officially expired, Molly had other offers on the table.
She said out. I was like, wow. So obviously this is pretty obvious. At least from Molly's point of view, I don't think it was the most amicable split.
News for you, you can't wake up and be Mad Dog Russo. You can't wake up and be Adam Shine. You can't wake up and be Stephen A. It takes work. In the end, we all have people to answer to.
Her contract was hanging in limbo, and people inside Bristol were whispering, oh, she must already have a job lined up. One insider even said, that job's gotta be with a competitor. Turns out he was dead right. NBC Sports, tired of getting dragged in ratings and desperate to bring some life into their morning lineup, circled Molly like a hawk. They saw her as the missing piece, smart, polished, and proven. She had the experience, the name, and the credibility that NBC had been craving to stand toe-to-toe with ESPN. And trust me, Stephen A. noticed. The same week Molly's NBC deal leaked, he switched gears fast. His SiriusXM segments turned into lectures about humility, knowing your place, and respecting the chain of command. But come on, anyone with ears could tell it wasn't just random wisdom. It sounded like a man hurt by betrayal, like someone who didn't expect his own co-star to play the game better than him. Can we really blame Molly though? After 10 years of cutting through shouting matches, managing egos bigger than stadiums, and being treated like a supporting act on his show, she finally said enough. She took the leap, and NBC came through with a deal that screamed power. They didn't just match her salary, they gave her the bag and the blueprint. And here's the wildest twist, NBC didn't just offer her a seat at the table, they handed her control. Executive producer credits, creative direction, her own projects across digital and television platforms, the kind of deal ESPN flat out refused to give her for a decade. While Stephen A. was still on air talking about how everyone has a boss and how you can't just define your own value, Molly was literally doing just that, writing her own terms at NBC headquarters. That's when things snapped. Stephen A. lost it, and insiders say the tension behind closed doors was like nothing ESPN had seen before. The public only saw the clean version, the sweet farewell, the polished Instagram note that read, "After much reflection, I've decided it's time to close this incredible chapter and step away from First Take. Hosting this show has been one of the greatest honors of my career." It sounded heartfelt, right? But according to people close to her, that message was layered with frustration, the exhaustion, the underappreciation, and the quiet anger of a woman who had been holding that studio together for years, while others got all the credit. And let's not act like this is new for ESPN. History speaks loud. Jemele Hill, Carrie Champion, Michelle Beadle, three powerhouse women who carried entire shows, pulled ratings, and brought audiences that ESPN could only dream of. Yet they all walked away feeling sidelined and disrespected. Now Molly's just the latest name on that growing list. She didn't want to become another what-if story. She wanted to build her own legacy, and NBC gave her the pen to write it. Meanwhile, Stephen A. still sits high on his ESPN throne, bragging about how every morning he wakes up asking himself one thing, his personal philosophy for success. The man's worth $20 million a year, and he'll remind you of it any chance he gets. But deep down, the irony is wild. Because while he's shouting about value and loyalty, the one person who stood by his side for a decade finally realized hers. And that's the truth that stings the most. Molly didn't leave because she hated ESPN. She left because she finally understood what she was worth, and she wasn't waiting around for Stephen A. or anyone else to tell her anymore. Stephen A. never asked himself, how do I uplift my co-hosts, or how do I protect my team?
How do I get my bosses more money? How do I get some of it? We don't get to define our own value. We don't get to define our own worth. We don't get to sit there and summarily say, this is who I am and this is what I'm going to do.
His mindset was simple, like, how do I make the money and how do I grab my cut? That's why Molly's move hits him right where it hurts. Because the second she walked away and signed that NBC contract, she didn't just leave a show. She cracked the foundation of the empire that revolved around him. She stopped playing by his rules, and that's something Stephen A. can't stand. You can hear in his tone the shift from calm to cold. On his radio show, he started dropping lines about humility, about understanding your place, and remembering who you answer to. Please. Who else could he possibly be talking about? That wasn't some random life advice. That was a direct shot disguised as a sermon. And the crazy part? This is coming from the same Stephen A., who turned negotiating leverage into an art form. The same man who practically bullied ESPN into making him the highest paid name on the network. When he fights for more money, it's smart business. But when Molly demands her worth, suddenly it's ego. That double standard is loud enough to echo through every studio hallway at ESPN. Let's rewind the clock a bit. The weekend before her exit, Awful Announcing and Sports Business Journal reported that Molly was expected to leave ESPN by the end of the year. No drama, no chaos, just a standard contract expiration story. But then boom, less than 24 hours later she was gone, vanished. Insiders called it an emergency landing, and that phrase says everything. You don't walk out mid-season during peak football coverage without a serious reason. Something massive happened behind closed doors, and all signs point to one thing. NBC's deal heated up faster than anyone expected. Think about it. If this really was a peaceful planned departure, ESPN would have turned it into a farewell spectacle. They would have promoted it, milked the ratings, maybe even had a highlight reel of her best moments. But instead, silence. One day she's there, the next, gone. No goodbye, no closure, just Stephen A. forced to break the news live, sounding like someone who'd been blindsided by his own teammate. His voice cracked, his expression slipped. He tried to hold it together, but you could tell something was off, and the biggest clue came in the way he addressed it. When the cameras rolled, he carefully said, "That's her story to tell. Now let's decode that for what it really means." Translation, he knows the truth but can't say it without blowing up ESPN's image. His own. He knows exactly why she left, and it wasn't about contracts or timing. It was about principle, about the quiet, unspoken dysfunction that everyone in the building sees but nobody dares mention. Molly's decision didn't just bruise his ego, it broke his illusion of control. For years, Stephen A. was the sun, and everyone else in the ESPN universe revolved around him. Producers, analysts, even the moderators, all moving in orbit to his rhythm. But when Molly broke free, that orbit collapsed. NBC handed her the kind of deal that screamed independence, and suddenly, the man who always controlled the narrative found himself watching someone else write her own. That's why he's been spinning her exit like a morality tale, trying to mask hurt pride as professionalism, because deep down Stephen A. knows that if he ever admitted the truth, if he said out loud that Molly left not because she was ungrateful but because she was undervalued, it would force him to face the part he played in keeping things that way. And that's the part he'll never say into a mic. And now we get to the whisper that's shaking the whole industry. Did Molly leave to get away from Stephen A.? It's a question everyone's asking, and it's spreading fast. One analyst even said straight up, "This is key because people have been wondering for years if there was tension between them." Think about it. The way she cut him off mid-rant when he got too carried away, the way she had to jump in and calm egos while Stephen A. dominated every debate. On camera, it looked like chemistry. Off camera, it might have been friction. What if that tension finally boiled over behind the scenes? What if NBC didn't just offer her a raise, but a way out? A clean break from Stephen A.'s shadow? That would explain everything. The sudden exit, the silence, the cold Instagram farewell that thanked everyone except him. 10 years of working side by side and not one mention of Stephen A.'s name? That's not coincidence. That's intentional. And trust me, fans saw it, commentators saw it, and Stephen A. definitely saw it. His reaction said it all. He didn't call her out directly, but his message was loud and clear. Instead of saying her name, he started giving long-winded speeches about knowing your place, staying humble, and as an understanding leverage. You could feel the shade dripping from every word. It was his way of saying, see what happens when you get too confident? But here's the thing. By doing that, he exposed himself because Stephen A. doesn't waste energy on people he doesn't see.
This was an abrupt landing. This is an emergency exit. This is an emergency landing.
Am I going to share it with you? No, because again, that's her story to tell. But I do think it's important that I started off the show by just acknowledging my love and appreciation for her and what she's meant to me and what she's meant to the show.
When I look at the abrupt, like, I'm not coming into work tomorrow.
Yeah.
That also is like, maybe there's pointing a finger at Stephen A. Smith. I mean, you can play it out to the end of the year and move on to your next deal. But when you don't come in, it makes me think maybe Stephen A. is a part of her frustration.
Now, Molly is not Stephen A. Smith. They don't need her as much as you need Stephen A.
As a threat. If Molly didn't rattle him, he'd have stayed quiet, but this time she did the one thing that shook him to his core. She took control of her own story, and for once he couldn't control the narrative. And that's just the beginning, because the truth behind Molly's NBC deal is even juicier. The second her departure hit the news, NBC was already deep in talks, not about salary but power. This wasn't some casual move, it was a strategic heist right under ESPN's nose. Multiple insiders confirmed that while ESPN was busy reassigning Molly to smaller projects, NBC was laying out a blueprint for her future. A future where she'd finally be in charge. Here's the truth, ESPN didn't want anyone to know. They were phasing her out. According to internal plans, Molly was being lined up for other projects after stepping away from First Take. Translation? They wanted to quietly push her into background roles, maybe digital hosting, maybe sideline coverage, but nothing close to the spotlight Stephen A. commands every day. The message was clear: you're valuable but not invaluable. And once again, the hierarchy showed where Stephen A. was untouchable and everyone else was replaceable, but NBC saw something ESPN couldn't. Behind closed doors, they pitched Molly something wild. The chance to not just appear on camera, but to shape the shows themselves. They wanted her to help build their new flagship morning lineup, a rival to First Take. And here's where it gets bold. They offered her the title of executive producer. That's not just a promotion. That's leverage, that's ownership, that's respect. ESPN had 10 years to give her that kind of deal and never did. NBC handed it to her on day one. Insiders say ESPN executives were blindsided. When Sports Business Journal first reported that Molly would leave at the end of the year, they thought they had months to plan. They figured they could test new moderators, manage the PR spin, and create their own goodbye narrative. But Molly flipped the script. She didn't wait for permission to She packed up and walked out early, cutting off ESPN's control over the story. That single move changed everything. Inside ESPN headquarters, alarms went off. Suddenly, it wasn't just a talent exit. It was a full-blown coup. NBC had moved faster, offered bigger, and played smarter. Within days, ESPN realized they lost one of their biggest faces, and worse, they looked completely unprepared. And right in the middle of all that chaos was Stephen A. Publicly, he played the nice guy, talking about friendship, praising her professionalism, wishing her success, but behind the scenes, he was livid. Not just because she left, but because of how she left. She didn't ask for his blessing, she didn't let him manage the narrative, she didn't play the game the way he plays it. And that's what burned the most. Stephen A. has built his reputation as the man with connections, the guy who can make calls, fix contracts, influence decisions. He prides himself on being the shot caller, the voice that ESPN listens to before anyone else. But this time, he couldn't stop it. One of his closest colleagues, someone he thought would always stay in orbit, broke free. So what did he do next? He started sending coded messages through his monologues. No names, just themes, talking about leverage, about loyalty, about understanding who signs your checks. But everyone knew what he was doing. That wasn't random commentary. That was a man drawing a line in the sand. Translation? I've still got the power, she doesn't. But deep down, Stephen A. knows that's not true anymore. Because for the first time in a decade, someone walked away from his orbit and didn't look back. And it's eating him alive. Stephen A. made it clear, I earned my deal, she didn't. That's how he sees it. But NBC, they didn't care less about ESPN's pecking order. They saw an opportunity, not a hierarchy. They cared about optics, about the message it would send when one of ESPN's most recognizable faces suddenly showed up on their network. This wasn't just a hire, it was a headline, a statement that screamed, if ESPN won't value its stars, we will. And the timing couldn't have been more ruthless. ESPN was in the middle of a bloodbath, massive layoffs left and right. Analysts, producers, even legendary commentators were shown the door. Whole departments were being gutted while Stephen A. strutted around untouched, his $20 million deal flashing like a diamond chain in a sea of pink slips. The optics terrible, so when Molly walked out, NBC saw their shot and took it. They pounced. What better way to embarrass a struggling ESPN than to steal one of its most visible women? and make her the face of NBC's new era. The irony? ESPN built this problem themselves. They created the storm that swallowed them whole. They lowballed her, dismissed her value, and assumed she'd never actually leave. They forgot that loyalty has limits. And NBC capitalized on that arrogance, because here's the real twist. NBC didn't just offer her more money, they offered parity. Not Stephen a dot dash level money, but close enough to send a loud public message. According to insiders, Molly's new deal is performance-based, structured to rise with ratings, podcast growth, and digital expansion. In other words, the exact setup ESPN refused to even consider for her. NBC didn't just cut a check, they gave her a path to wealth, control, and recognition. That's why Stephen A.'s been throwing shade non-stop, because deep down, he knows Molly secured the one thing he'll never fully have again, freedom. But wait, it gets even messier. Insiders claim that just days after her exit, ESPN execs flooded Stephen A. with talking points. They wanted him to control the narrative. They told him to emphasize that Molly's departure was her choice, that ESPN didn't want to lose her, and that she'd always be part of the family. And sure enough, he repeated every word on air, smiling, nodding, selling the company line, classic corporate spin. But fans weren't fooled. They saw right through the polished statements and the forced smile. They could hear the frustration in his tone and connect the dots themselves. Because let's be real, Molly didn't just walk away. She leveled up. She walked straight into something bigger, better, and bolder. And Stephen A., he was left stewing in silence, realizing that all his power couldn't stop this one move. That's the dirty little secret. Molly's NBC deal didn't just advance her career, it fractured his empire. She didn't just exit the building, she cracked the foundation. And when word of that NBC contract officially dropped, the whole sports media industry froze. Not because she got a new gig, everyone expected that sooner or later, but because of the speed and size of the deal. NBC didn't play it safe. They didn't test the waters like ESPN had planned with its rotation of guest moderators. They went all in. Sources say the deal hit 7 figures, packed with bonuses tied to show performance, digital reach, and cross-platform growth. That means Molly isn't just earning a salary, she's betting on herself. If her show wins, she wins big, like a franchise player cashing playoff checks. And that's not even the biggest bombshell. Reports suggest the deal includes cross-network privileges, Olympic coverage, NFL features, late-night collaborations, the kind of exposure that transforms a sports host into a household name. NBC isn't just giving her a seat at the table, they're building her an entire floor. Now compare that to ESPN's sad little counteroffer, a modest raise, a few vague promises about new projects, and zero creative control. They didn't want to empower her, they wanted to contain her, to keep her boxed in as the moderator who made his show work. But NBC saw the star, not the sidekick, and they gave her the keys to the studio. No wonder she didn't even glance back when she left. Meanwhile, ESPN went into panic mode. Within hours of the announcement, the network scrambled to fill her spot on First Take. Insiders called it the casting carousel. They started cycling through replacements, Malika Andrews, Sage Steele, Taylor Rooks, trying to see who could hold their own next to Stephen A. But it didn't click, the chemistry wasn't there, the flow was off. The rhythm that Molly brought, the subtle balance she maintained between chaos and control was gone. The debates turned sloppy, segments dragged too long, guests talked over each other. For the first time, people realized what Molly actually brought to the table. The same fans who once accused her of interrupting suddenly missed her interjections, because without her, First Take felt like a car with no brakes, just noise, no direction. And that's when the conversation flipped. The internet started saying what Stephen A. didn't want to hear. Molly wasn't just part of the show, she was the show's glue. Her timing, her composure, her ability to keep Stephen A. in check, it all became clear once it was gone. And the numbers started to reflect it too. Engagement dropped, discussions felt unbalanced, and that signature First Take energy, it just wasn't hitting the same. So while Stephen A. might still hold the microphone, the truth is this: Molly walked away with the real win. NBC handed her everything ESPN refused to, and in doing so, they exposed exactly how fragile Stephen A.'s empire really is. Meanwhile, NBC was busy turning Molly's exit into a full-blown PR victory. They didn't just welcome her, they celebrated her like a trophy snatched from a rival. Their press release didn't mince words. It praised her decade of on-air dominance, her reputation as the calm in the chaos, and her new vision for reshaping sports talk from the ground up. It was a direct hit at ESPN, and everyone, especially Stephen A., knew it. Publicly, he tried to keep it professional. He smiled through the interviews, spoke warmly about Molly, and said he was sad to see her go. But listen closely, and that charm starts to crack.
And guess what? I don't give a damn what anybody say unless you have the leverage to do it. When you heard me at a time when we were discussing my contract negotiations all over the media and all throughout the sports world, what I talked about was what my worth was based on what the numbers showed. I talked about these are the ratings, this is the revenue. But in the end, rather, she made a decision to walk away from the show effective immediately. As you see from her Instagram post, that story is for her to tell. Do I have an idea? Of course I do. Am I going to share it with you? No. Because again, that's her story to tell. It was a contract negotiation that was going on. ESPN certainly did not want to lose her. But in the end, rather, she made a decision to walk away from the show effective immediately. As you see from her Instagram post,
you can hear the bitterness bleeding through when he adds that final jab. That story is for her to tell. Classic Stephen A. He's not saying it outright, but that line drips with subtext. I know the real reason, and it's not what they're saying. That one sentence lit the speculation on fire. So what really pushed Molly out? Was it about the money, the power, or was it finally breaking free from the never-ending shadow of Stephen A. Smith? Many point to the timing. Just days before her sudden exit, Stephen A. had been on air bragging about all the people he helped get paid. Shannon Sharpe, Cameron, even Pat McAfee. He listed them off like trophies in his collection. He was the kingmaker, the shot caller, the man who decides who eats. For someone like Molly, who had been holding the show together for years, it must have hit different hearing him take all that credit. No wonder she walked. But the real blow? It came later. According to insiders, Stephen A. completely lost it when he found out what was really in Molly's NBC deal. Not just the money, but the title, executive producer. That's what pushed him over the edge. Because for a man who spent his entire career fighting for control of his platform, seeing his former co-host leapfrog into a producer role at a rival network, that had to sting deep. Especially knowing that ESPN has never, not once, given him full creative control over First Take. And that's exactly why his next SiriusXM rant hit like a thunderclap. It wasn't random business talk, it was personal. Every lesson about humility and knowing your place sounded less like advice and more like resentment. He wasn't just venting about talent contracts, he was talking about Molly, about losing his grip, about watching someone else achieve the kind of freedom he's been chasing for years. Because the truth is, Stephen A. isn't used to losing control. He's ESPN's golden child, the face of First Take, the centerpiece of Disney's entire sports empire. The company bends over backwards to keep him happy. And yet right in front of everyone, Molly walked away, signed with NBC, and stole the spotlight. She didn't need his blessing, his influence, or his approval. She took her own path, and that's exactly what bruised his ego most. But this story doesn't end there, because the more NBC builds around Molly, the more it chips away at the kingdom Stephen A. spent years constructing. ESPN knows it, NBC knows it, and deep down Stephen A. knows it too. The fallout is only beginning. Behind the scenes, Molly's move didn't just shake ESPN, it set off alarms. Multiple insiders claim that in the days before her official announcement, Stephen A. started making calls, lots of them, not just to ESPN's top brass, but to industry contacts, producers, even rival executives. His mission? To figure out how serious NBC really was, and according to some whispers, maybe even persuade them to back off. Now let's be clear, no one can prove every call that went down, but the whispers, they're loud. One industry writer noted how unusually quiet Stephen A. was in the hours after the story broke, speculating that he wasn't stunned, he was strategizing. That silence wasn't peace, it was panic, but NBC wasn't budging. In fact, they doubled down. Sources say NBC executives saw Molly's signing as a power play, a chance to finally punch a hole in ESPN's dominance over morning sports talk. And they had the perfect setup. NBC already had the rights, Olympics, NFL, Premier League soccer. They had the sports, but they were missing the personality, someone who could anchor their debates with credibility and composure. Molly was the missing piece, and once they realized that, they went all in. And that's when the conversation flipped. The internet started saying what Stephen A. didn't want to hear. Molly wasn't just part of the show, she was the show's glue. Her timing, her composure, her ability to keep Stephen A. in check, it all became clear once it was gone. And the numbers started to reflect it too. Engagement dropped, discussions felt unbalanced, and that signature First Take energy, it just wasn't hitting the same. So while Stephen A. might still hold the microphone, the truth is this: Molly walked away with the real win. NBC handed her everything ESPN refused to, and in doing so, they exposed exactly how fragile Stephen A.'s empire really is. Meanwhile, NBC was busy turning Molly's exit into a full-blown PR victory. They didn't just welcome her, they celebrated her like a trophy snatched from a rival. Their press release didn't mince words. It praised her decade of on-air dominance, her reputation as the calm in the chaos, and her new vision for reshaping sports talk from the ground up. It was a direct hit at ESPN, and everyone, especially Stephen A., knew it. Publicly, he tried to keep it professional. He smiled through the interviews, spoke warmly about Molly, and said he was sad to see her go. But listen closely, and that charm starts to crack. You can hear the bitterness bleeding through when he adds that final jab. That story is for her to tell. Classic Stephen A. He's not saying it outright, but that line drips with subtext. I know the real reason, and it's not what they're saying. That one sentence lit the speculation on fire. So what really pushed Molly out? Was it about the money, the power, or was it finally breaking free from the never-ending shadow of Stephen A. Smith? Many point to the timing. Just days before her sudden exit, Stephen A. had been on air bragging about all the people he helped get paid. Shannon Sharpe, Cameron, even Pat McAfee. He listed them off like trophies in his collection. He was the kingmaker, the shot caller, the man who decides who eats. For someone like Molly, who had been holding the show together for years, it must have hit different hearing him take all that credit. No wonder she walked. But the real blow? It came later. According to insiders, Stephen A. completely lost it when he found out what was really in Molly's NBC deal. Not just the money, but the title, executive producer. That's what pushed him over the edge. Because for a man who spent his entire career fighting for control of his platform, seeing his former co-host leapfrog into a producer role at a rival network, that had to sting deep. Especially knowing that ESPN has never, not once, given him full creative control over First Take. And that's exactly why his next SiriusXM rant hit like a thunderclap. It wasn't random business talk, it was personal. Every lesson about humility and knowing your place sounded less like advice and more like resentment. He wasn't just venting about talent contracts, he was talking about Molly, about losing his grip, about watching someone else achieve the kind of freedom he's been chasing for years. Because the truth is, Stephen A. isn't used to losing control. He's ESPN's golden child, the face of First Take, the centerpiece of Disney's entire sports empire. The company bends over backwards to keep him happy. And yet right in front of everyone, Molly walked away, signed with NBC, and stole the spotlight. She didn't need his blessing, his influence, or his approval. She took her own path, and that's exactly what bruised his ego most. But this story doesn't end there, because the more NBC builds around Molly, the more it chips away at the kingdom Stephen A. spent years constructing. ESPN knows it, NBC knows it, and deep down Stephen A. knows it too. The fallout is only beginning. Behind the scenes, Molly's move didn't just shake ESPN, it set off alarms. Multiple insiders claim that in the days before her official announcement, Stephen A. started making calls, lots of them. Not just to ESPN's top brass, but to industry contacts, producers, even rival executives. His mission? To figure out how serious NBC really was, and according to some whispers, maybe even persuade them to back off. Now let's be clear, no one can prove every call that went down, but the whispers, they're loud. One industry writer noted how unusually quiet Stephen A. was in the hours after the story broke, speculating that he wasn't stunned, he was strategizing. That silence wasn't peace, it was panic, but NBC wasn't budging. In fact, they doubled down. Sources say NBC executives saw Molly's signing as a power play, a chance to finally punch a hole in ESPN's dominance over morning sports talk. And they had the perfect setup. NBC already had the rights, Olympics, NFL, Premier League soccer. They had the sports, but they were missing the personality, someone who could anchor their debates with credibility and composure. Molly was the missing piece, and once they realized that, they went all in. Every time Stephen A. implied she overplayed her hand, NBC spun it as proof that she was fearless. Every time he lectured about knowing your boss, Molly's team framed her as the face of independence. It became a PR war, and Stephen A. couldn't win it. He looked defensive, she looked liberated, and that's exactly why this story goes beyond just one contract or one rivalry. It's symbolic. It's about the shift happening right now in sports media. The so-called moderators and sidekicks aren't staying quiet anymore. While the stars cash the big checks, they're demanding ownership, authority, and creative control, especially women in the industry. They're not asking for permission anymore. They're taking it. They're not just fighting for seats at the table, they're building their own tables. Stephen A. Smith may have slammed Molly Qerim, but in doing so, he revealed the one thing he's been trying to hide: Fear that the empire he built, the network he dominates, might not be as untouchable as he once thought. Because now for the first time, someone who helped to build that empire has walked away and proved she could do it bigger and better on her own. And Molly, she's living proof that sometimes the boldest move you can make isn't fighting for space at someone else's table, it's walking away and creating your own. We gotta see what's her next move, and if you are interested in that, subscribe and like. That wraps up this video. For more stories like this one, packed with drama, power, and unexpected twists, click one of the boxes playing on your screen right now.